of the Wizard's Companion. The first tale I went through when I did Horace's quest, because it's about the Prince and the Cowardly Lion, so now we're reading the rest of the tales. So here we go, the sixth tale, My Other Self, on a hilltop. What follows is the extraordinary story of an ordinary little girl. When I was a little girl, I had the reddest hair you've ever seen, and I lived with my mother in a small village tucked away in the hills. I was never any good at magic, but I loved gathering and could grow all sorts of flowers and medicinal herbs. Behind my house was a low hill from which you could enjoy a wonderful evening view. I used to walk to the top of it every night to sit on a big old root and watch the sun go down. One day, my mother cut her hand on a glass that I had broken. Though she washed the wound straight away, just as she'd always taught me, the cut soon became infected, and by the next morning she had a very high fever. I took care of her the best I could, of course, but several days passed without any improvement in her condition. Then one night, after I'd cried myself to sleep with worry, I woke with a start to find myself standing in front of a strange door. I opened this door and walked through it to emerge on top of my favorite hill. It looked just the same as it always did, except for one thing. There was someone else there, sitting on my root and sobbing quietly. I took a sharp breath and thought to myself, could the girl sitting on the root actually be me? Her hair was just as red as mine, and it glittered like a ruby in the setting sun. There's the picture. I was the bright bluebird. I was feeling quite sad myself, but the girl sitting on the root seemed absolutely inconsolable. Feeling sorry for her, I asked, "Are you all right? Why are you crying?" At this, the weeping girl lifted her face, giving me another shock. It was exactly like mine. "I was careless, and my bird flew away," she said. "Oh, I did love it so." "So that's why you're crying. I've been careless too, as it happens. I made my mother sick." I thought for a moment, then asked, "What kind of bird was it?" "It was blue, bright blue. It was so very beautiful." "My mother's eyes are blue as well," I sighed, "but they don't seem to sparkle like they did before she took ill." We carried on talking for a little while, and before long we became firm friends. She loved gardening too, and was enjoying gazing at the sunset from the crest of the hill. It seemed we had absolutely everything in common. Eventually I said, "Here, take this. It's a flower I grew. It's called a warm welcome, and birds love it. Perhaps it might make your bluebird come back." I had already put some of these flowers at my mother's bedside to try and make her feel better, as well as some in her hair. "Thank you," said the girl, smiling. "Oh my, it really does smell wonderful. Hey, would you like to come to my house?" I nodded, and off we went down the hill together and into the girl's house. She placed the flower I'd given her next to the window. Before long, we heard a sound. Peep, 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 cheep, cheep, cheep. And as a blue bird flew in through the window. "Chee-chee," shouted the girl, recognizing her missing pet. The bird had flown straight for the vase that held the flower. It seemed a little unsteady, as though one of its wings was injured, but I couldn't help feeling happy that the warm welcome I'd given the girl had made her bird come back. Waking from the dream. All of a sudden, I was in front of the strange door again. I walked through it and found myself lying in bed once more. It was just a dream, I sighed. Then I threw off the sheets and went to my mother's bedroom. Much to my surprise, though, I found that she wasn't there. That's when I heard a sound coming from the kitchen and ran downstairs. "Mother," I cried. "Good morning," she replied cheerfully. "You must have been wondering where I'd got to. I just felt so much better when I woke up this morning. Now then, would you like some breakfast? I'm famished." And my mother's blue eyes were sparkling once more. Every person in this world has a soulmate, a person in another world with whom they share a soul. Soulmates' destinies are intertwined, and occasionally they even overlap. So should you ever chance to step through a strange door, do not be surprised if you meet someone just like you. Okay. Tale number 7. How the little girl became queen. In Xanadu, the kingdom in the clouds, the ruler had always possessed many a mysterious power, not least the ability to make the most prescient of prophecies. This is the story of one such ruler, of whom little we expected when first she ascended to the throne. Xanadu's new ruler was a little girl, cowardly and weak. Though it was a peaceful place with a temperate climate and few, if any, monsters, Xanadu had never known a cowardly ruler. The thought alone was simply preposterous. God's honest words. The girl herself knew that she was a coward, having never displayed courage or daring since the moment of her birth. She was scared of sleeping alone, and the thought of being in the temple at night filled her with a holy dread. Despite claiming that she had a well of courage to draw on if necessary, she would undoubtedly have been found wanting if she had not been asked to deal with a giant or a dragon or even a lion. Life surrounded by adults was lonely and dull for the little girl. She had no friends and became very sullen. As a result, everyone assumed that she was humble and wise, for most of those who rise to rule over Xanadu are powerful sorceresses and prone to self-importance. Though baseless, the myth of the little girl's wisdom meant that her reign was very peaceful, with none of the tensions or infighting that marred the reigns of her predecessors. Jeez. Sinister rumors. Sorry, guys. Whew. Get some of that water. She had not ruled for long, however, when it became apparent that a dragon had taken up residence near Xanadu in a great cavern, measureless to man. Alas, this was no ordinary dragon. Indeed, it was said to be as large as a castle, utterly evil and endowed with a tail twice 5 miles long. Such sinister rumors grew, as sinister rumors always do, and by the time they'd reached the palace, they had the courtiers in a state of some excitement. After much frantic discussion, a conclusion was reached. The ruler, the little girl, must be sent to deal with the dragon. Though she was still young, everyone believed her to be both wise and brave, and it was concluded that her age was of no significance. Thus, leaving no choice but to fulfill the duty assigned to her, the little girl set off for the dragon's cavern. A savage race. The waning moon cast scarcely any light into the dismal cavern, and big wet drops fell onto the little girl's head as she made her way through the darkness, nervously clutching her wand. Though she quivered with fear, she knew that she had little choice but to push on. She was the ruler of Xanadu, after all, and rulers must show courage, however frightened they may be. Having pushed deep into the cavern, the girl finally encountered the dragon. It was not as big as she'd feared, but it would still have ordinarily been more than a match for a little girl like her. The dragon, however, was injured. One of his wings was broken, and he was unable to fly. Indeed, he had no way at all of avoiding the little girl's spells. It seemed the tables had turned in her favor. Just then, the dragon turned to her and said, "You came alone? I suppose you knew I was injured. I shall surely perish soon. All you need to do is wait, and your duties shall be fulfilled." But the little girl took out her wand and proceeded to draw a rune. The spell she cast began to heal the dragon's wounds. Being so young, it took a long time for the healing magic to work, but her concentration never wavered. "Heal me, and I could come after you and eat you. Are you sure about what you are doing?" The little girl thought for a moment before replying politely, "I should not like to be eaten, yet I do not see why you should die. Perhaps we could reach an agreement instead. I will heal your wing if you swear to spare this kingdom." The dragon made no reply and simply gazed at the girl with flashing eyes. Once his wing had been fully healed, the dragon picked up the little girl and, placing her on his broad back, strode out of the cavern. Then, flexing his newly healed wing, he carried the girl to the summit of a tall mountain. As the dragon reached the top of the mountain, it seemed to grow in front of the girl's eyes. At last it began to resemble the castle-sized dragon that the courtiers of Xanadu had mentioned. Indeed, it began to look as though it could eat a castle thrice over. "This is my true self," declared the dragon. "Now you may be weak, but you are both courageous and kind. My original intent was to eat every one of your subjects, but I have decided to honor our bargain and spare this kingdom." The dragon's kind words touched the little girl deeply, and the two of them became great friends. Then, the dragon shrank back to a smaller size and put the girl on his back again, and together they made for Xanadu. When they reached the city, however, the dragon grew big once more. When the little girl explained what had happened to her courtiers, They realized not only that she was wise and brave, but that she was also very kind. From that moment on, she was no longer referred to as the little girl. She had become the queen of the heavens. She never forgot her dragon friend, and they spoke together often until the end of their days. Ooh. Let's see, I guess we can do the shepherd boy next. My throat's drying out from reading all of these. Okay, so we're on the 8th tale. Let's see. Okay. Now we'll try to get the rest of them in. Or not. I guess I don't have all of the tales. Okay. The 8th tale, the shepherd boy. The lazy son. Two shepherds who were father and son worked together in the fields. The father looked after the sheep from morning till night, constantly patrolling the pasture and looking out for wolves. The son, however, spent every day at leisure, staring into the distance and not lifting a finger to help his father. One day, the father turned to his son and said with regret, "I am getting old and shall soon be retiring. Though you are my only son, it has become clear to me that you have no enthusiasm for shepherding. I am starting to think that I should be better entrusting my flock to someone else." The son was quite shocked, for the flock was his only livelihood, and resolved to start assisting his father in the fields, chasing sheep, tending the grass, and so on. Alas, he soon grew tired of such tasks. At a loss as to what to do, the son supposed he should pay a visit to old Father Oak, an ancient tree in the deep dark wood, possessed of infinite wisdom on all matters. "Oh, old Father Oak, is there not some manner of fruit that I can swallow to excite my enthusiasm?" the son asked in vexation. "I am afraid that such things do not exist," replied old Father Oak. "There is, however, a fountain hidden deep within a nearby forest. Drinking of its water provides a goodly dose of energy." The fountain. The son traveled in the direction indicated by old Father Oak until he came to the fountain and tested its cool surface with his hand. "I shall take some of this water home with me," he thought, before realizing that he had no vessel in which to carry it. "Alas, I must return home empty-handed," he lamented. The son was about to go back to fetch a jug when he decided to sample a mouthful of the fountain's water. Sure enough, he immediately felt the great surge of energy that old Father Oak had predicted, and used his axe to chop down a nearby tree, carving it into a pitcher that was almost as big as himself. Once the pitcher was finished, the son filled it with water from the fountain and made for home. The vessel was very heavy, and the journey was a long one. He nearly gave up on several occasions, but every time he felt like abandoning his journey, he would stop by the wayside to take another gulp of water from the pitcher, and eventually he arrived back home. "I have enough water here to last a lifetime," the son thought with a sigh of relief. He was very weary, and he fell into bed to sleep soundly till morning. The pitcher. The son awoke from his slumber and resolved to take another drink of water from the pitcher. "Oh, how full of life I am!" he exclaimed happily, and set about his duties at double the usual speed. As he did so, he resolved that no one else must be allowed to drink the precious water in the pitcher. In the days that followed, the son spent much of his time ensuring that no one went near his pitcher, yet he took care to attend to his chores while he did so, knowing that his father would otherwise be angry. Whenever a villager approached the pitcher for a drink of water, the son would interrupt his own labors and offer a cup of different water, thus preventing any of the water in his pitcher from going to waste. He was also reluctant to waste the water from the fountain on himself, and so worked hard every day without touching it. Then, one very hot day, after the son had been hard at work in the fields, he realized that a terrible thing had happened. The water had evaporated in the searing heat of the sun. When the son realized that the water upon which his future depended had disappeared, he was overcome with despair and collapsed upon the grass. The sight of the son lying prone excited the villagers concerned, and they rushed to see if he was all right, for the son had gained a reputation in the village for being kind and hardworking on account of all the cups of water he was wont to provide thirsty villagers. Some of the villagers gave the son a drink of water as he lay there, and he was amazed at how delicious it tasted. It was the freshest, cleanest water he'd ever drank, and what's more, it gave him the same surge of energy that the water from the fountain had done. His father stood next to him and said kindly, "No water on earth can compare to the first water you drink after sweating all day. Why, I should think that is fair sight better than the water from that fountain," for the father knew that his son had visited the fountain. The son rose to his feet and smiled back at his father. "You are right, father, it truly is better by far. Hard toil brings its own rewards." Okay, the ninth tale, Flute Maker. Yeah, I guess I'm missing the 10th tale? Yeah. Let me look it up real fast. I need to see where the 10th tale is. I have to go to the black market in Hamelin for it. Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and end this video here. I said it's 6, 7, 8. I only did 3 stories. I guess I'll do this one, and then I'll end the video. Oh yeah, ninth tale, the Flute Makers. 4 brothers. In a certain kingdom there once lived 4 brothers. Though their parents had both died and they had grown up poor, the brothers had become famous and highly regarded. The first brother was very strong. Once, when the kingdom was in need of a new lake, he had lifted a stone bigger than 3 dragons out of the ground, creating a great hollow. He then carried the stone to the top of the tallest mountain in the land, lest it proved an eyesore to anyone. The king could not contain his delight as he watched the hollow slowly filling with water. The second brother was the greatest artist in the land. He went to the top of the mountain and carved wonderful sculptures from the stone that his brother had carried there, and offered them to the king, who was rendered speechless for the first time in his life by their beauty. The third brother was known as a master craftsman. He took the sculptures that his brother had made and erected sturdy walls between them, creating a mighty castle. He even used the remaining pieces of stone to build a working clock. The king was amazed at how it always told the correct time despite being made of stone. The king now had a new castle that he believed was the most beautiful, the best defended, and the most convenient in the wide world. The brothers were delighted and became full of confidence, for each of them believed that he was the greatest man alive. "I am the one the king should thank for having such a wonderful castle. After all, I am the one who carried that stone all the way up the mountain. Thou mayest carve the stone, and thou mayest have bound them together, but had I not brought the stone up here in the first place, nothing of that could have been done," said the first brother. "Ha! But the king would not have looked twice at the castle had I not carved those sculptures so beautifully," retorted the second brother. "And yet it was I who took thy sculptures and made them into a castle. What use hath a king for sculptures, pray tell, beautiful though they may be?" After some time, these discussions became so fractious that the 3 brothers resolved to live apart on the eastern, western, and southern edges of the kingdom. The youngest brother of the 4 was unlike his 3 older brothers. He excelled at nothing, and was weak and clumsy. Though his older brothers would mock him constantly, the youngest brother was a docile sort, and did not pay much heed to such insults. He was, however, worried about his brothers living apart, and he resolved to pay each of them a separate visit. A thick fog. A short while later, disaster befell the kingdom. A thick fog covered the entire land, blocking all sunlight for 100 days. Crops would not grow, and people became unwell, and yet the very worst of it was that the fog put an end to all music, for it simply could not be heard through the heavy broom. The whole kingdom adopted a silent funeral air, and still the source of the fog remained a mystery. One night, as the king slept fitfully, he had a strange dream. In it, someone was telling him that the only way to clear the fog was to play a certain flute, the most beauteous flute in the world. Upon waking, the king immediately summoned the 3 brothers who had built his castle and commanded them to build such a flute. Since the 3 brothers no longer spoke to one another, however, they would not cooperate, and each went off to carve his own. I am the only one capable of making a flute fit for a king, said one brother. It is simply too great a feat for the two of you. Ha! Thou mightest better say that of thine own self, countered the second. My flute will be the finest, as thou shalt soon see. Boast if you will, scoffed the third. All men know that mine will be the best. And so the arguments continued. After some time, all three brothers finished making their flutes, and went to present them to the king and his subjects. All the kingdom gathered on the shores of the lake that had been created by the first brother, anxious for the presentation to begin. The first brother picked up his flute, which was very big and made of stone, and blew. Try as he might, however, the flute would not produce a sound. The king soon turned his attention to the second brother. His flute was a beautiful, delicate instrument made of clay, but when he blew it, it too produced no sound. The king was now becoming rather agitated, and hastily commanded the third brother to blow his flute. It was made of a single bone, with holes drilled in the appropriate places, and yet it too could not produce a single note. The king was furious and banished the brothers from his sight. The world's greatest flute. Several days later, the king awoke to hear the song of a flute that he had dreamed about. It was a beautiful sound, one that cleansed the heart and brought tears to the eyes of royals, ministers, soldiers, plowmen, and even the baker's cat, whom many had thought deaf. As the flute played on, the thick fog that had plagued the kingdom began to clear. The king was naturally delighted, and started searching for the source of this blissful sound. Trusting to the evidence of his ears, the king came at last to the house of the fourth brother. There he found him and his three brothers sitting together with tears in their eyes. The king began to extend his warmest gratitude to the youngest brother, but was politely interrupted. Alas, this flute was not my work. My three brothers built it. And he proceeded to explain all that had come to pass. The youngest brother had been visiting his three brothers every day, hoping to persuade them to work together as before, but his brothers were stubborn and would not listen. After some time, traveling hither and thither, from south to east to west and back again, all the youngest brother's efforts got the better of him, and he collapsed in a heap. When his three elder brothers heard what had happened, they all felt sorry for their youngest sibling and went to visit him as he recovered. The eldest, "Is there aught I can do for you?" he asked. "Indeed there is. Hie thee to the forest and cut down the tallest tree thou findest there. Chop it then into small pieces and bring them here to me." Thinking that his brother wanted firewood to keep him warm under the thick fog, the first brother agreed to do as he was asked. "Very well, younger brother," he said, "I shall start cutting right away." "Thank you," the youngest brother replied from his bed, and before long the first brother came back, a smile on his face and a pile of logs under his arm. The next day the second brother came to visit his youngest sibling. "Is there aught I can do for you?" he asked, upon which the youngest brother brought out one of the logs that the first brother had cut for him. "Indeed there is. Carve of this wood something beautiful for me, perhaps a pipe?" Thinking that his brother wanted an ornament in his room to make him feel better, the second brother agreed without the slightest hesitation. Very well, younger brother," he said, "I shall start carving right away." "Thank you," the youngest brother replied from his bed, and before long the first brother came back, a beautiful wooden pipe under his arm. The next day the third brother came to visit his youngest sibling. "Is there aught I can do for you?" he asked, upon which the youngest brother brought out the pipe that his second brother had carved. "Indeed there is. Wouldst thou be so good as to drill some holes into this pipe for me?" Thinking that his brother wanted something to entertain himself while he was ill, the third brother gladly agreed. "Thank you," said the youngest brother from his bed, while his older brother had returned with the finished pipe, "but I actually have one more request." My bad. "Of course, younger brother, what is it?" "Call our two brothers and tell them to come here." Though the third brother hated his older brothers, he could scarce refuse his ailing sibling's request, so piteous did he seem, and he agreed to go and fetch them. Despite all being gathered beneath the same roof, the three brothers would not look at each other, much less speak. Then, in the midst of the silence, the youngest brother pulled out the flute they had made and lifted it to his lips. As soon as he began to play, the three brothers began to weep, realizing how foolish they had been. As they listened to the sound of the flute, they recalled the past that they had shared, their humble home, their parents who had loved them so, the days when they had supported each other and helped each other before they won fame. The four brothers continued to weep as they realized that each was only truly special when he worked with the others. All four of them, indeed, for it was only the youngest brother who could produce a pure note from their flute. The tears they wept were the most beautiful tears the world had ever seen, for they were tears of love. After the king had finished listening to the youngest brother's story, he decided to give all four brothers a special medal. From that day onwards, the brothers agreed to always work together, and they all lived happily ever after. Okay, go ahead and end this video, and then we'll start on the 10th tale.